Chapter 29. The fate of the Master and Margarita is decided. High above the city, on a stone terrace at the top of one of Moscow's most beautiful buildings, built over a century and a half ago, two were watching the sunset. Azazello and Woland. They were not visible from the street below, shielded from prying eyes by a balustrade with plaster pots and plaster flowers. But from there, they could see almost to the edges of the city. Woland sat on a folding stool, wearing his black soutane. His long, broad rapier was sticking vertically out of a gap between two terraced tiles, making a sundial. Slowly and steadily, the sword's shadow grew longer, creeping towards the black shoes on Satan's feet. Resting his sharp chin on his fist, huddling on the stool with one leg tucked underneath him, Woland had his gaze fixed on the immense collection of palaces, giant buildings, and tiny hovels listed for demolition. Azazello had parted with his modern attire, the jacket, bowler, and patent leather shoes, and was dressed in black, like Woland. He now stood motionlessly, not far from his master, his eyes likewise glued to the city. Woland spoke. "What an interesting city, is it not?" Azazello shifted and answered respectfully. "I prefer Rome, Messiah." "Yes, it is a matter of taste," Woland replied. A short while later his voice came again. "And why is there smoke over there on the boulevard?" "That's Griboyedov burning," Azazello replied. "I suppose that inseparable couple Korolyov and Behemoth has been there." "There can be no doubt of it, Messiah." They fell silent again, both watching as the westward windows on the top floors of the giant buildings lit up with blinding, fragmented sunlight. Woland's eye burned just like one of those windows, even though he was sitting with his back to the sunset. But then something made Woland turn away from the city and direct his attention to a round tower located behind him on the roof. A grim, ragged, black-bearded man, smeared with clay mud, stepped out of the tower wall. He wore a chiton and homemade sandals. "Ha!" Woland exclaimed, looking at the visitor condescendingly. "You are the last person I would have expected to see here. What is your business, uninvited but foreseen guest?" "I'm here to see you, spirit of evil and master of shadows," said the visitor, glaring unpleasantly at Woland. "If you are here to see me, why didn't you wish me a good evening, former tax collector?" Woland asked sternly. "Because I do not wish you anything good," the visitor brazenly replied. "Then you'll have to reconcile yourself to the fact that I am doing quite well," countered Woland, and a grin twisted his face. "You began spouting nonsense the moment you appeared on this roof. And let me tell you what it is, your tone. You spoke as though you did not recognize shadows or evil. Kindly think on this. Where would all your good be if evil did not exist? What would the earth look like without shadows? Objects cast shadows, and people too. Here is the shadow from my sword, but there are also shadows from trees and living creatures. Or would you strip the entire globe of trees and living things to fulfill your fantasy of basking in barren light? You are a fool." "I will not argue with you, old sophist," Matthew Levi replied. "You cannot argue with me, for the reason I have already mentioned. You are a fool," Woland said, and asked, "Speak quickly before you tire me. Why are you here?" "He sent me." "And what would he have you tell me, slave?" "I'm not a slave," Matthew Levi said, growing increasingly angry. "I am his disciple." You and I speak different languages, as always, Woland rejoined. But that does not change the things we speak of. So, then. He has read the Master's work, Matthew Levi said, and asks you to take the Master with you and reward him with peace. Or is that too hard for you to do, spirit of evil? Nothing is too hard for me, Woland replied, as you well know. He was silent for a moment, and then added, But why don't you take him with you into the light? He has not earned the light. He has earned peace. Levi spoke in a sad voice. Tell him it will be done, Woland replied. His eye flashed, and he added, And leave here at once. He also asks that you take the one who loved him and suffered for him, Levi said to Woland, pleading for the first time. We would never have figured that out without you. Go. Matthew Levi disappeared. Woland summoned Azazello and commanded, Fly over there and arrange everything. Azazello left the terrace, and Woland remained alone. His solitude was short-lived, however. The sound of footsteps on terrace tiles came from nearby, along with two animated voices, and Korovyov and Behemoth appeared before Woland. The fat man no longer had his primus, but was loaded with other items. A small landscape in a golden frame was tucked under his arm, and a half-burned chef's coat was draped over one hand. His other hand held a whole salmon with skin and tail still attached. Korovyov and Behemoth reeked of burning. Behemoth's nose was covered in soot, and his cap was half incinerated. "Salut, Messiah!" cried the restless couple, and Behemoth waved his salmon. "Real nice," said Woland.
"Imagine, Messiah!" Behemoth shouted with cheerful excitement. "They took me for a looter!"
"Judging by the items you are carrying," Woland replied, glancing at the landscape, "that's exactly what you are."
"Believe me, Messiah,"
Behemoth began intimately. "No, I don't," Woland curtly replied.
"Messiah, I swear that I made heroic attempts to save everything that could possibly be saved, and this is all of it."
"Why don't you tell me how Griboyedov caught on fire?" Woland asked. Both Korovyov and Behemoth spread their hands and raised their eyes to the sky, and then Behemoth cried,
"I can't fathom it myself. We were sitting there quietly, peacefully, having a bite to eat. And suddenly, bang, bang!" Korovyov picked up. "Gunfire! Mad with fear, Behemoth and I ran to the boulevard, our pursuers hot on our heels. We made a dash for Timiryazev. But our sense of duty," Behemoth interjected, "overcame our shameful cowardice, and we returned."
"Ah, so you returned," said Woland. "Well, then I'm sure the building burned to a crisp."
"To a crisp," Korovyov confirmed sadly. "Literally to a crisp, Messiah, as you have so accurately put it. Nothing but ashes." "I headed to the meeting room. That's the one with the columns, Messiah," Behemoth narrated, "hoping to save something valuable. Oh, Messiah, my wife, had I only been married, risked becoming a widow at least 20 times. But fortunately I'm not married, Messiah, and let me be frank, I'm glad I'm not. Oh, Messiah, who would trade a bachelor's freedom for a burdensome yoke?"
"Again with the nonsense," Woland noted.
"I understand and continue," replied the cat. "So then, the landscape, nothing else could be removed from the room. The flames rushed in my face. I ran to the storeroom and rescued the salmon. I ran to the kitchen and rescued the coat. I believe I did all I could, Messiah, and fail to see the reason for the sceptical look on your face."
"And what was Korovyov doing while you were looting?" asked Woland.
"I was helping the firemen, Messiah,"
Korovyov responded, pointing to his torn trousers. "Ah, in that case I'm sure they'll have to build a completely new building."
"It will be built, Messiah," Korovyov replied. "Permit me to assure you of it."
"Well then, let us hope it is even better than the old," said Woland.
"It will be, Messiah,"
said Korofiev.
"It certainly will," added the cat. "Trust me, I'm a regular prophet." "In any case, we are here, Messiah,"
Korofiev reported,
"and await your instructions."
Woland rose from his chair and approached the balustrade. For a long time he gazed silently into the distance, his back to his entourage. Finally he stepped away from the edge, resumed his seat, and said, "There will be no instructions. You have done all that you could, and I no longer require your services for the time being. You may rest. A storm is coming, the final storm. It will finish all that's been left unfinished, and we will set out."
"Very well, Messiah," the two buffoons said, and disappeared somewhere behind the round tower in the centre of the terrace.
The storm that Woland spoke of was already gathering on the horizon. A black cloud rose from the west and cut off half the sun. Then it covered all of it. The air on the terrace became cool. Soon afterwards, it became completely dark. Darkness, descending from the west, obscured the giant city. Gone were the bridges, the palaces, all of it gone, as though it had never existed. A fiery thread ran across the sky. A thunderclap shook the city. Another one came, and the storm began. Woland disappeared in the gloom. Chapter 30. It's time! It's time! "You know," Margarita was saying, "just after you fell asleep last night, I was reading about the darkness that descended from the Mediterranean Sea. And those idols, oh, the golden idols, I just can't stop thinking about them for some reason. I think it's about to rain now as well. Can you feel the air grow cooler?" "This is all well and good," replied the master, smoking a cigarette and breaking up the smoke with his hand. "And the idols too, God be with them. But I have absolutely no idea what will happen to us next." This conversation took place at sunset, just as Matthew Levi appeared before Woland on the terrace. The basement window was open, and anyone who peeked in would have been surprised at how strange the people inside looked. Margarita was wearing her black coat directly over her bare skin, and the master was dressed in his hospital gown. This was because Margarita had absolutely nothing to wear, since all of her things were back at the mansion, and even though the place was close by, returning there to reclaim her clothing was out of the question. As for the master, they found all his attire in the closet, as if he had never left. He simply did not wish to get dressed, aiming to emphasize to Margarita the ridiculousness of their situation. He was, however, cleanly shaven for the first time since that autumn night. In the clinic, they only clipped his beard. The room looked very strange as well, and it was difficult to sort anything out in the chaos. Manuscripts littered the rug and the couch. A book was sticking out of an armchair, spine upwards. Dinner was served on the round table, with several bottles standing among the hors d'oeuvres. The master and Margarita did not know where the food and drink had come from. They found it already on the table when they woke up. The master and his companion had slept right until sunset on Saturday. They woke up fully replenished, with only one side effect remaining from yesterday's adventures. Both were experiencing a dull pain in their left temples. Their mental state changed considerably, however, as anyone eavesdropping on their conversation would have been able to ascertain. There was positively no one around to eavesdrop, though. One of the best features of the little courtyard was that it was always deserted. Every day, the spring scent from the greening willows and lindens outside became stronger, and a light breeze was already fanning it into the basement. "Oh, the devil!" the master suddenly exclaimed. "Just think about it," he said, extinguishing the butt of his cigarette in the ashtray and clutching his head with both hands. "Just listen. You are an intelligent person, and you were never insane. Are you seriously telling me that yesterday we were at Satan's?" "Absolutely," Margarita replied. Right, right, the master noted with irony. It seems one madman has turned to two, husband and wife. He raised his arms to the sky and shouted, "The devil knows what this is! The devil, the devil, the devil!" Instead of answering, Margarita collapsed on the couch in a fit of laughter, waving her bare legs in the air, and then exclaimed, I can't help it. I can't. Just look at yourself." After the master, in embarrassment, adjusted his hospital long johns and she finished laughing, Margarita grew serious. "You unwittingly spoke the truth just now," she said. "The devil knows, and believe me, the devil will arrange everything." Her eyes flashed, and she jumped up and started to dance on the spot, shouting, "How happy I am! How happy! How happy that I made a deal with him! Oh, the devil! The devil! Sounds like you'll have to live with a witch, my dear." She dashed to the master, clasped him round the neck, and began to kiss his lips, his nose, his cheeks. Strands of her unkempt black hair danced over the master, and his cheeks and forehead burned with kisses. "You really do look like a witch, you know." "I don't deny it," Margarita replied. "I am a witch, and I like it." "Oh, all right," said the master. "A witch, then. All well and good. I've been abducted from the hospital, also very nice. Taken here, let's say, and... Look, even if they don't bother looking for us, tell me, in the name of all that's holy, how are we going to live? Believe me, I say this because I care about you." Just then, 2 blunt-toed boots and the lower end of a pair of pin-striped trousers appeared in the window. The trousers bent at the knee, and someone's heavy behind blocked the light. "You home, Aloysius?" a voice asked from above the trousers on the other side of the window. "Here we go," said the master. "Aloysius?" Margarita asked, moving to the window. "He was arrested yesterday. Who wants to know? What's your name?" The knees disappeared instantly along with the behind. The gate clanged, and everything returned to normal. Margarita fell on the couch and laughed until tears poured from her eyes. When she quieted down, her face changed dramatically. She began to speak seriously and climbed down from the couch as she spoke, crept over to the master's knees, and began to caress his head as she gazed into his eyes. "How you must have suffered, my poor darling. I alone know. Look at the grey hairs on your head, at the permanent lines by your lips. You've had to think too much, and now I shall think for you. And I promise that everything will go spectacularly well." "I'm not afraid of anything, Margot," the master said suddenly, and raised his head, looking just as he looked when he wrote of things he had never seen and yet knew they had happened. "I am not afraid because I have already endured it all. They tried to frighten me too much, and now they can frighten me no more. But I pity you, Margot. That's the problem. And that's why I keep repeating the same thing over and over. Come to your senses. Why ruin your life with a sick, impoverished man? Go back. I say it because I pity you." "Oh, you," Margarita whispered, shaking her tousled head. "Oh, you unfortunate man of little faith. I spent an entire night trembling and naked for you. I shed my very nature and replaced it with another. I sat in a dark closet for months and cried my eyes out, thinking of only one thing: the storm over Yerushalayim. And now, when happiness has fallen in our lap, you would chase me away." "I will leave, then. But know that you are a cruel man. They have drained your soul." A bitter tenderness filled the master's heart, and he started crying in Margarita's hair. She cried too, and whispered to him, her fingers playing over his temples. "All those threads, all those threads. Your head is turning white as snow before my eyes, your poor long-suffering head. Look at your eyes. I see the desert in them. Your shoulders burdened. They've crippled you. Crippled you. Margarita's words became incoherent as she shuddered with tears. Then the master wiped his tears, lifted Margarita from her knees, rose himself, and said firmly, "Enough. You've made me ashamed. You may rest easy knowing I will never give in to weakness and raise this question again. I know we both suffer from this mental illness, which I may have passed to you. Very well, then. Together we shall carry it." Margarita brought her lips close to the master's ear and whispered, "I swear on my life, swear by the son of the astrologer king whose story you've uncovered, that all will be well." "All right, then," the master replied. Laughing, he added, "Of course, people are bound to seek aid from the supernatural when they've been as completely robbed as we have. So be it. I agree to seek it too." "Now you are back, you are laughing," Margarita replied. "And to hell with your long words. Who cares if it's supernatural or not? I'm hungry." And she dragged the master by the arm to the table. "I'm still not sure this meal won't suddenly fall through the ground or fly out of the window," said the master, now completely calm. "It won't." And at the same moment they heard a nasal voice at the window. "Peace be with you!" The master flinched, but Margarita was already used to the incredible, and shouted, "Why, it's Azazello! Oh, how sweet, how nice!" She whispered to the master, "You see, they didn't forget us," and ran to open the door. "Cover yourself, at least," the master shouted after her. "I couldn't care less," Margarita called back from the tiny hallway. And soon Azazello was bowing, saying hello to the master, and flashing his crooked eye, while Margarita was exclaiming, "Oh, I'm so glad! I've never been so glad in all my life! But forgive me for being naked, Azazello." Azazello begged her not to worry, assuring her that he had not only seen his share of naked women, but also women who had been skinned entirely. He sidled up eagerly to the table, after placing some package, wrapped in dark brocade, in a corner by the furnace. Margarita poured Azazello some cognac, and he gladly drank it. Without taking his eyes off Azazello, the master would occasionally pinch his left hand under the table. But the pinching did not help. Azazello did not vanish into thin air, nor, frankly, was there any reason for him to do so. There was nothing scary about the short, red-haired man, except perhaps his wall-eye, which did not require any magical explanations, and his clothing, some sort of cassock or cloak, which was not that extraordinary either, come to think of it. He deftly drank his cognac like any good man, by the glass and without diluting it with food. The master's own head began to buzz from the cognac, and he thought, "No, Margarita is right. Of course it's a messenger of the devil sitting before me. Why, only the night before yesterday I was convincing Ivan that it was Satan he had met at Patriarch's Ponds, and today I somehow became frightened of the thought and started carrying on about hypnosis and hallucinations. What the hell does hypnosis have to do with it?" He looked closely at Azazello, and saw a sort of tension in his eyes, some hitherto unrevealed thought. "He's not just visiting. He's here on business," thought the master. His powers of observation served him well. Finishing his third shot of cognac, which had absolutely no effect on him, the visitor spoke thus. "Hell, it's a cosy little basement you have here. I wonder, though, what are you going to do here in this basement?" "That's exactly what I'm asking," the master replied, laughing. "Why do you worry me, Azazello?" Margarita asked. "We'll make it somehow." "Please, please," Azazello cried. "I wouldn't even think of worrying you. I fully agree. Somehow? Oh, yes, I almost forgot. Messiah sends his regards and invites you to join him for a quick ride if you so choose. What do you say?" Margarita nudged the master under the table with her leg. "With great pleasure," the master replied, studying Azazello, who continued, "We hope Margarita Nikolaevna will not refuse either?" "I certainly won't," said Margarita, and again her leg brushed against the master's.
"Wonderful!" Azazello exclaimed. "Now, this I like. 1, 2, ready to go. Not like back in the Alexandrovsky Gardens."
"Oh, don't remind me, Azazello. I was a fool then. Though, can you really blame me? It's not every day that you run into evil spirits."
"You sure don't," Azazello confirmed. "If you did, it would be very nice."
"I like the speed, too," Margarita spoke excitedly. "The speed and the nakedness, like a Mauser. Bang! And how he shoots!" Margarita exclaimed, turning to the master. "A 7 under the pillow and any pip." Margarita was getting drunk, and her eyes were on fire.
"And again, I almost forgot," Azazello exclaimed, slapping his forehead. "Forgive me, I'm exhausted. Messiah has sent you a gift," he said, speaking to the master. "A bottle of wine. Note that it is the same wine the Procurator of Judea drank, Falernian wine."
Quite naturally, such a rarity fascinated Margarita and the master. Azazello unwrapped a very mouldy jug from a piece of dark burial brocade. They sniffed the wine, poured it into glasses, and held it up to the light in the window as it faded before the storm. The wine turned everything a bloody colour. "Woland's health!" Margarita exclaimed, raising her glass. All three took a large gulp from their glasses. Immediately, the last of the light began to dim in the master's eyes. He felt short of breath, and knew that the end was near. He saw a deathly pale Margarita stretch her arms out to him helplessly, before dropping her head on the table and sliding to the floor. "Poisoner!" The master had time to scream. He wanted to grab a knife from the table to strike Azazello, but his hands slipped helplessly from the tablecloth, and then everything in the basement turned black and disappeared. The master fell over backwards, splitting the skin on his temple on the edge of the desk as he fell. When the poisoned victims fell silent, Azazello sprang into action. First, he dashed out through the window, and a few moments later appeared at Margarita Nikolaevna's mansion. Ever precise and careful, Azazello wanted to make sure that everything had been carried out properly. Indeed, everything was in order. Azazello saw a grim-faced woman awaiting her husband's return leave her bedroom. Suddenly, she turned pale, clutched her heart, and cried helplessly. "Natasha! Somebody! Over here!" She fell on the floor in the living room, never reaching the study.
"Everything's in order?"
said Azazello. A moment later he was back at the fallen lover's side. Margarita was laying face down on the rug. With his iron hands, Azazello turned her over like a doll and peered into the poisoned woman's face. It was changing before his eyes. Even in the stormy twilight, it was possible to see that her temporary witch-like squint was disappearing, along with her recently acquired look of cruelty and violence. The face of the deceased grew softer and lighter, and her savage grin turned into a simple expression of suffering. Azazello squeezed apart her white teeth and poured in several drops of the same wine he used to poison her. Margarita sighed and rose without Azazello's help. She sat down and asked weakly, "Why, Azazello, why? What have you done to me?" Seeing the master lying on the floor, she shuddered and whispered, "This I did not expect. Murderer."
"No, no," Azazello replied. "He will rise in a moment. Why must you be so nervous?"
The red-haired demon's voice was so persuasive that Margarita believed him at once. She jumped up, strong and full of life, and helped him give the prone man some wine. Opening his eyes, the master glared grimly and hatefully repeated his last word. "Poisoner."
"Oh, yes, an insult is my usual reward for a job well done," Azazello replied. "Are you blind? Come, see the light."
The master rose and looked around with lively, lucid eyes. "What is this new thing?" he asked.
"It means," Azazello replied, "that it's time to go. Can you hear the storm rumbling? It grows dark. The horses are pawing the ground. The little garden shakes. Say goodbye to the basement. Say it quickly.
Ah, I understand, said the master, glancing round. You have killed us. We are dead. How clever, how timely. Now I understand.
Oh, please, Azazello replied. Is it you I hear? How can you be dead when your friend here calls you a master, when you can think? Is it really necessary to be able to sit in a basement wearing hospital underwear to be considered alive? It's ridiculous.
I understood all that you said, the master exclaimed. Say no more. You are 1,000 times right. Great Woland, Margarita echoed. Great Woland! He thought up a far better solution than I. But the novel, she shouted to the master. Take the novel with you, no matter where you go. There's no need, the master replied. I know it by heart. And you won't forget a word? Not a single word? Margarita asked, pressing against her lover and wiping away the blood from his injured temple. Fear not. I will never forget anything any more, he replied.
In that case, fire! Cried Azazello. It is fire that started it all, and fire that we use to end it all. Fire! Margarita cried fearsomely. The basement window banged as the wind blew aside the curtains. A short, merry thunderclap shook the sky. Azazello thrust his clawed hand into the furnace, pulled out a charred log, and set fire to the tablecloth. Then he ignited a stack of old newspapers on the couch, then the manuscripts, then the curtain on the window. Intoxicated by the impending ride, the master picked up some book from the shelf, threw it on the table, and ruffled its pages. It burst into happy flames. Burn, old life, burn! Burn suffering! Cried Margarita. Crimson pillars of fire were already weaving about the room. In a cloud of smoke, all three ran out of the door, climbed up the stone steps, and found themselves in the courtyard. The first thing they saw there was the landlord's cook, sitting on the ground amid scattered potatoes and bunches of onions. Her condition was understandable. 3 black stallions stood by the shed, snorting, quivering, and kicking up fountains of dirt. Margarita mounted hers first, then Azazello, and finally the master. Moaning, the cook raised her hand to make the sign of the cross, but Azazello shouted menacingly from the saddle. "I'll cut off that hand!" He whistled, and the horses soared into the air, broke through the linden branches, and plunged into a low black cloud. Immediately, smoke appeared from the basement window. The cook's weak, pitiful voice came from below. "Fire!" The horses were already flying over the roofs of Moscow. "I want to bid farewell to the city," the master shouted to Azazello, who was riding in front. Thunder drowned out the end of the master's sentence. Azazello nodded and sent his horse into a gallop. Ahead, the storm cloud rushed swiftly towards the riders, but the rain had not yet begun. They flew over the boulevard, watching as the tiny figures below scattered, seeking shelter from the rain. The first drops fell. They flew over a pillar of smoke, all that remained of Griboyedov. They flew over the rapidly darkening city as lightning flashed above. The roofs gave way to greenery. Then the downpour came and turned the riders into 3 giant bubbles in a wall of water. Margarita had already experienced flight, but the master had not. He was surprised at how quickly they reached their destination, the only man he wanted to say goodbye to, as he had no one else. Through the veil of rain, he immediately recognized Stravinsky's clinic, the river, and the pine wood he had spent so much time studying. They alighted in a grove clearing not far from the clinic. "I will wait for you here," Azazello shouted, cupping his hands to his mouth, now lit up by lightning, now disappearing in the grey haze. "Say your farewells, but quickly." The master and Margarita dismounted and flew through the clinic's garden, flickering like 2 watery shadows. A moment later,
The master was opening the grating on the windows of room number 117 with a habitual motion. Margarita followed him inside. They approached Ivan, unseen and unnoticed in the rumbling and howling of the storm. The master stopped by the bed. Ivan lay there motionless, just as he had when he first witnessed a storm in his new place of rest. This time, however, he was not crying. When he looked closer at the dark silhouette that had burst in from the balcony, he rose, stretched out his arms, and said happily, "Ah, it's you. I've been waiting and waiting for you. Here you are at last, my neighbour." "I am here," the master said to that, "but unfortunately I can be your neighbour no more. I am leaving forever and have come here to say goodbye." "I knew it. I had guessed," Ivan said quietly and asked, "So you met him?" "Yes," said the master. "I came to say goodbye to you because you are the only man I have spoken to recently." Ivan brightened up and said, "It's good that you came. I'll keep my word, you know, no more poetry. I'm interested in something else now." Ivan smiled and looked past the master with crazed eyes. "There's something else I want to write. I've figured out quite a few things while I've been lying here, you know." The master became excited at these words. He sat down on the edge of Ivan's bed and said, "That's good. That's good. You'll write the rest of his story." Ivan's eyes flashed. "But won't you do it yourself?" He hung his head and added thoughtfully, "Oh yes, what am I saying?" Ivan stared fearfully at the floor. "Yes," said the master, and his voice sounded hollow and unfamiliar to Ivan. "I won't write about him any more. I'll be busy with other things." A distant whistle cut through the noise of the storm. "Did you hear?" asked the master. "The storm, yes." "No. I am being called. It's time to go," the master explained and rose from the bed. "Wait, one more thing," asked Ivan. "Did you find her? Did she stay faithful to you?" "She is here," the master said, and pointed at the wall. Margarita's dark shape separated from the white wall, and she approached the bed, gazing sorrowfully at the prone young man. "Poor boy," she whispered noiselessly, and bent down to the bed. "So beautiful," Ivan said without envy, but sadly and with a sort of quiet tenderness. "See how well everything turned out for you? Not so much for me, though." He thought a while and added pensively, "Then again, maybe it will." "It will. It will," Margarita whispered, leaning even closer. "Let me give you a kiss on the forehead, and all will be well. Trust me, I have seen it all, and I know." The young man clasped her round the neck, and she kissed him. "Farewell, disciple," the master said barely audibly, and began to dissolve in the air along with Margarita. The window grating closed. Ivan grew anxious. He sat up on the bed, looked round in alarm, and even moaned a little. He began talking to himself, and finally stood up. Evidently, the increasingly violent storm was troubling his soul. He was also troubled by the fact that his ears, already used to the constant quiet, had detected uneasy steps and muffled voices outside his door. Shaking nervously, he called out, "Praskovia Fyodorovna!" Praskovia Fyodorovna came in right away and gave Ivan a questioning, alarmed look. "What? What's the matter?" she asked. "Is the storm bothering you?" It's okay, we'll help you. I'll call the doctor." "No, Praskovia Fyodorovna, there's no need," said Ivan, looking anxiously at the wall and not at Praskovia Fyodorovna.
There's nothing really wrong with me. I can figure it out now, don't you worry. Tell me, though, Ivan said confidentially, what just happened in the next-door room, 118?
18? Praskovya Fyodorovna repeated, her eyes darting. Nothing much. But Ivan immediately caught the falseness in her voice and said, Oh, Praskovya Fyodorovna, you are such a truthful person. You think I'll get violent? It won't happen, Praskovya Fyodorovna. Just tell me the truth. I can sense it through the wall anyway. Your neighbour just passed away, Praskovya Fyodorovna whispered, unable to overcome her natural truthfulness and kindness. Engulfed in a sudden flash of lightning, she looked fearfully at Ivan. But nothing awful happened to the young man. He only raised his finger meaningfully and said, I knew it. I assure you, Praskovya Fyodorovna, that another person has just passed away in the city. I even know who. Ivan smiled mysteriously. A woman. Chapter 31. On Sparrow Hills. The storm vanished without a trace. In its stead, a multicoloured rainbow arched over all of Moscow, drinking from the Moscow River. High up on a hill, 3 dark silhouettes stood between 2 groves. Woland, Korovyov, and Behemoth sat mounted on black horses and gazed at the city unfolding on the other side of the river, at the broken image of the sun shining in thousands of westward windows, at the gingerbread towers of the Devichy convent. The air rustled, and Azazello alighted near the waiting group, the Master and Margarita flying in the wake of his black cloak. "It seems I've had to disturb you again, Margarita Nikolaevna, and you, Master," Woland spoke after a brief silence. "But I trust you won't hold a grudge. I doubt you'll have cause for complaint. So then," he said to the Master alone, "bid farewell to your city. It is time to go." Woland pointed his black gauntlet across the river, where countless little suns melted the glass in the window panes, where smog, smoke, and steam rose from the city after a hot day. The Master jumped from his saddle, abandoned the riders, and ran to the hillside edge, his black cloak dragging on the ground behind him. The Master looked at the city. At first, a nagging sadness crept into his heart, but it was quickly replaced by sweet excitement, a wandering gypsy's thrill. Forever. It's a lot for a man to grasp, whispered the Master, licking his dry, cracked lips. He listened carefully to what was going on in his soul. For a moment, his excitement seemed to turn into a feeling of deep, mortal insult, but the sentiment was fleeting. It vanished to be replaced by proud indifference and finally settled into an expectation of eternal peace. The group of riders waited silently for the Master. The group of riders watched the tall, dark, gesticulating figure on the hillside. It would look up one moment, as if trying to see far beyond the edges of the city, and hang its head the next, studying the trampled, wilting grass under its feet. The bored Behemoth broke the silence.
"Maitre,"
he spoke,
"permit me a goodbye whistle before the ride?"
"You might frighten the lady," Woland replied. "And besides, don't forget that your antics are over for today."
"Oh no, Messiah," Margarita responded, mounted side-saddle like an Amazon, arms akimbo, her sharp train stretching to the ground. "Let him whistle. I feel sad before the long journey. It's natural even when one knows it will end in happiness, isn't it, Messiah? Let him make us laugh, or else I fear there'll be tears and everything will be ruined before the journey." Woland nodded to Behemoth, who livened up immensely and hopped out of his saddle. He placed his fingers in his mouth, puffed up his cheeks,
and whistled. Margarita's ears rang, and her horse reared in alarm. Dry twigs rained from the trees in the grove, and flocks of crows and sparrows rose in the air. A column of dust started off towards the river, and they could see that several passengers on a river taxi going past a nearby dock had lost their hats. Behemoth looked round proudly.
"Oh, it was a whistle, I suppose,"
Korofyov remarked condescendingly.
"A whistle, sure enough, but if one were to speak objectively, it was a very mediocre whistle."
"Well, I'm no choir master," Behemoth replied, puffing up with dignity, and winked suddenly at Margarita.
"Why don't I try one for old time's sake?"
Korofyov said, rubbing his hands and blowing on his fingers. "All right, but watch it," came Woland's stern voice from his horse. "None of your injurious stunts."
"Trust me, Messiah,"
Korofyov replied, placing his hand on his heart.
"Just fun, pure fun."
He stretched out, as if made of rubber, and fashioned a complex shape from the fingers of his right hand. Coiling up like a spring, he suddenly unwound in a whistle. Margarita did not hear the whistle, but she certainly felt it as she and her fiery steed were thrown some 20 yards to the side. An oak tree nearby was torn out of the earth, and cracks ran along the ground all the way to the riverbank. A huge portion of the riverbank, containing a dock and a restaurant, collapsed into the river. Boiling water shot up, and an entire river taxi was washed onto the low green opposite bank, with completely unharmed passengers still inside. Killed by Fagot's whistle, a jackdaw fell dead at the feet of Margarita's snorting horse. The whistle startled the master. He clutched his head and ran back towards the waiting group. "Well, then," Woland said to him from high up in the saddle, "are all the accounts settled? Have all the goodbyes been said?" "Yes, it is over," the master said, calming down, and looked directly into Woland's face without fear. And then Woland's terrible, trumpet-like voice rolled over the hills. "It is time!" and was followed by Behemoth's sharp whistle and laughter. The horses blasted off at a gallop, lifting their riders into the air. Margarita felt her wild steed champing and tugging at the bit. Woland's cloak billowed over the entire cavalcade and obscured the evening sky. When the dark shroud blew aside for a moment, Margarita turned and saw that the speckled towers and the turning airplane above were gone, along with the city itself. It had all fallen through the earth, leaving nothing but fog. Chapter 32. Forgiveness and Eternal Refuge. O gods, ye gods of mine, how sad the earth at night, how strange the swamp mists! He knows it, who has wandered astray in those mists, who has suffered greatly before dying, who has walked the earth carrying an unbearable burden. The weary one knows, and he leaves the earth's mists, swamps, and rivers without regret. He readily gives himself into the hands of death, knowing that it alone can bring him peace. Even the magical black horses grew tired and carried their riders slowly, the inescapable night closing on their heels. Feeling it approach, even the tireless Behemoth grew quiet and rode silently and seriously, clutching the saddle with his claws, his tail ruffled in the wind. The night pulled a dark shawl over the woods and the meadows. The night lit up dismal little lights somewhere far below, alien lights that were no longer of any use or consequence to Margarita or the master. The night overtook the cavalcade, raining white specks of stars on the mournful sky above. The night grew dense as it flew alongside, tearing the riders' cloaks from their shoulders and exposing deceptions. Whenever Margarita opened her eyes as she rode in the cool breeze, she saw all the riders' appearances change as they headed towards their destination. And when a full, crimson moon rose above the woods ahead, all the disguises disappeared. The frail, magical garments plunged into the swamps below and drowned in the mists. Few would have now recognized Korofyov-Fagot, self-appointed interpreter for a mysterious consultant who needed none, in the man who was riding directly beside Woland on Margarita's right. In place of the one who left Sparrow Hills in tattered clown's garb, bearing the name of Korofyov-Fagot, a knight in dark violet armour now rode silently, the gold chain of his bridle clinking softly, his face eternally grim and unsmiling. He rested his chin on his chest and was immersed in thought, gazing neither at the moon above nor at the ground below as he flew next to Woland. "Why has he changed so?" Margarita asked quietly of Woland as the wind whistled by. "This night once made an ill-timed joke," Woland replied, turning his silently burning eye towards Margarita. "The pun he made in a conversation about light and darkness was rather unfortunate. As a result, the knight had to spend slightly more time as a joker than he bargained for. But tonight is one of those times when accounts are settled. The knight has paid his dues and closed his account." The knight stripped off Behemoth's bushy tail and fur, scattering it in clumps over the swamps. He who used to be a cat entertaining the Prince of Darkness turned out to be a slim young man, a demon page, the best jester the world had ever seen. He too was quiet now as he flew noiselessly through the air, the moonlight washing over his young face. Azazello was flying to the side of everyone else in glittering steel armour. The moon had changed his face as well. The ugly, awkward fang disappeared, and the wall-eye turned out to be false. Both his eyes were now alike, empty and black, his face cold and white. Azazello flew on in his true form as the demon of the waterless desert, the killer demon. Margarita could not see herself, but she could clearly see the Master change. His hair turned white in the moonlight and gathered in a braid behind his back, flowing in the wind. When the wind blew the Master's cloak away from his feet, Margarita could see the stars of his spurs twinkling on his jackboots. Just like the young demon page, the Master rode without taking his eyes off the moon. He smiled at it, like at a dear old friend, and muttered to himself, from a habit acquired in room number 118. And finally, Woland too flew in his true appearance. Margarita could not say what his bridle was made of. To her it looked like a string of moonlight, the horse itself a lump of darkness, its mane a storm cloud, the rider's spurs white stars. Thus they flew in silence for a long time, until the land below began to change. The gloomy forests sank into the darkness, drawing along the dimly glittering blades of rivers. Large, gleaming boulders appeared below, forming crevices where the moonlight could not reach. Woland reined in his horse on a joyless stone plateau, and the riders moved on at a walk, listening to the flints and rocks crunch under the horses' feet. The moon flooded the ground with bright green light. Further ahead, in the deserted surroundings, Margarita soon noticed a chair and the white shape of a man sitting in it. The man appeared deaf, or at least very deep in thought. He did not hear the rocky ground shake under the heavy horses, and the riders approached without disturbing him. The moon helped Margarita see, providing better illumination than any electric light. She witnessed the seemingly blind man rub his hands together briskly and peer at the moon with his unseeing eyes. Now she could also make out an enormous, dark, sharp-eared dog lying at the foot of the heavy stone chair that sparkled in the moonlight. Like his master, the dog was staring anxiously at the moon. Pieces of a broken wine jug lay at the feet of the sitting man amid a never-drying puddle of dark red liquid. The riders stopped their horses.
"Your novel has been read,"
Woland spoke, turning to the master.
"with the only comment being that, unfortunately, it is not finished. And so, I wanted to show you your hero. For around 2,000 years he has sat on this platform and slept, but every full moon he suffers from insomnia. It afflicts both him and his faithful guardian, the dog. If cowardice is the worst of sins, then it seems the dog is not guilty of it. The only thing the brave hound feared was the storm. Well, he who loves must share the fate of the one he loves."
"What is he saying?" Margarita asked, her perfectly calm face clouding with compassion.
"He is saying the same thing over and over," Woland's voice said, "that even by the moonlight he has no peace, and that he has an unpleasant duty. He says this whenever he is awake, but when he is asleep he dreams of one thing alone, a path made of moonlight. He wants to walk on it and talk to the prisoner Hanotsri. He insists that he was not able to finish his conversation with him on that day long ago, the 14th day of the spring month of Nisan. But alas, he cannot walk on that road for some reason, and no one ever comes, and so he is forced to talk to himself. For variety's sake, he sometimes adds that most of all he despises his own immortality and his unbelievable fame. He says he would gladly trade his life for that of the tattered vagrant Matthew Levi."
12,000 moons for one moon long ago, isn't that a little much?" asked Margarita.
"Is the story with Frida about to repeat itself?" said Woland. "Don't trouble yourself with this, Margarita. All will be as it should, for that is how the world is built."
"Let him go!" Margarita suddenly cried in a piercing voice, like she cried when she was a witch. Her cry dislodged a rock somewhere in the mountains, and it went crashing down into the abyss below, filling the mountains with thunder. But Margarita could not tell whether the roaring noise was the rumbling of the rock or a bout of infernal laughter. For Woland was laughing as he looked at Margarita, and then said, "Do not shout in the mountains. He is used to avalanches, and you will not disturb him. You need not plead for him, Margarita, for the one he so wishes to talk to already has." Woland turned to the master and said,
"Well then, you may conclude your novel with a single phrase."
The master seemed to be waiting for this as he stood motionlessly, gazing at the sitting procurator. He cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted, sending an echo scattering over the deserted, treeless slopes. "You are free! Free! He awaits you!" The mountains turned the master's voice to thunder, and the self-same thunder tore them down. The accursed rocky walls collapsed, leaving only the platform with the stone chair. In the black abyss that remained, a vast, ancient city lit up, with golden idols overlooking a garden lush with many thousands of moons' worth of growth. The long-awaited path, made of moonlight, came down into the garden, and the sharp-eared dog was the first to run along it. The man in the white cape with blood-red lining rose from his chair and shouted something in a hoarse, torn voice. It was impossible to make out what he was saying, and whether he was laughing or crying. They could only see him run speedily up the shining path after his faithful guardian. "Am I to follow him?" the master asked anxiously, touching his reins. "No," Woland replied. "Why chase that which is over?" "Back there, then?" asked the master, turning and pointing behind him to the hazy image of a recently abandoned city, with gingerbread monastery towers with fragmented sunlight in the window-panes. "Also, no," Woland said, and his dense voice poured over the cliffs. "Romantic master, he who your hero so longs to see, the hero you invented and have just freed, has read your novel." Woland turned to Margarita. "Margarita Nikolaevna, I fully believe that you try to think up the best future for the master. But truly, the future I offer you, the future Yeshua has requested for you, is far better. Leave those two alone," Woland said, leaning from his saddle towards the master and pointing after the departed procurator. "Let us not interfere. Perhaps they can yet agree on something." Woland waved his hand at Yerushalayim, and it disappeared. "Leave that as well," Woland pointed behind him. "What will you do in that basement?" The broken sun in the window-panes extinguished. "Why all that?" Woland continued softly and persuasively. "O thrice romantic master, would you not rather take long walks in a blooming cherry-tree alley with your friend and listen to Schubert in the evenings? Would you not rather write by candlelight with a quill pen? Like Faust, would you not rather sit over a retort in the hopes of crafting a new homunculus? That is your destination there. A house awaits you, with an aging servant. The candles are already lit, and will soon extinguish as dawn inevitably arrives. Take this path, master, and farewell. I must go." "Farewell!" the master and Margarita cried together. Heeding no road, the black Woland dashed into the rocky abyss, and his entourage came crashing down after him. The rocks, the platform, the path of moonlight, Yerushalayim, none remained. The black horses vanished as well. The master and Margarita saw the promised dawn. It began immediately after the full moon at midnight. In the first rays of morning light, the master and his companion crossed a mossy stone bridge. The faithful lovers put the stream behind them and headed down a sandy path. "Listen to the silence," Margarita said to the master, as the sand rustled beneath her bare feet. "Listen and enjoy that which you never had in life, silence. Look at your eternal home up ahead, your reward. I can already see the Venetian window and the twisting grapevines rising to the very roof. It is your home, your eternal home. I know that, come evening, you will be visited by those you love, those who intrigue you and who will never trouble you. They will play for you and sing for you, and you will see what a candle-lit room looks like. You will fall asleep in your dirty, eternal nightcap, and you will sleep with a smile on your face. Your sleep will strengthen you and inspire you to wise thoughts. And you won't be able to chase me away any more. It is I who will guard your sleep." Thus spoke Margarita as they approached their eternal home, and it seemed to the master that her words were flowing in his ears like the whispering stream they left behind, and the master's troubled, needling memories began to fade. Someone was setting him free.
just as he himself had just released his hero. This hero vanished into the void, vanished forever, forgiven on a Sunday night, the son of an astrologer king, the cruel fifth procurator of Judea, the knight Pontius Pilate.